It's a story that has picked up national attention.
In 1914, a strange photograph surfaced.
When I first saw the photographs, I got goosebumps.
Rugged men proudly posing beside what appeared to be a living dinosaur.
It's so haunting.
For decades, this image has been laughed off as a hoax, a trick of early photography. Now, renowned paleontologist Dr. Harper and Dr. Brody Webb uncover this haunting photograph, an unusual discovery that shakes the very foundations of what we know about extinction. Join us as we peel the layers off something far more sinister, a mystery buried deep in history that some believe was never meant to be uncovered. The stunning 1914 photograph. The world has always been fascinated by dinosaurs. From the terrifying roars of Jurassic Park to the pages of children's books, we've done everything possible to keep these ancient creatures alive in our imaginations.
This is a monster from a child's nightmare brought to life.
After all, they're the ultimate symbol of nature's raw power, magnificent rulers of the earth who vanished millions of years ago. Or at least, that's what we've always believed. But what if dinosaurs didn't vanish completely? What if, just over 100 years ago, one was not only seen, but photographed? Dr. Harper wasn't looking for trouble. She was simply doing what paleontologists do best, digging through dusty museum archives in search of forgotten fossils and expedition notes. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the air smells like old paper and the only sound is the soft creak of wooden drawers. Then she found it. Tucked between faded expedition logs and yellowing maps was a small, grainy photograph dated 1914. At first glance, it seemed like any old sepia-toned relic, a group of rugged explorers posing proudly with their discovery. But as Harper's eyes adjusted, her heart skipped a beat. Because standing beside the two men wasn't just a pile of bones or a fossil, it was something else entirely. The creature in the photograph didn't match any known fossil record. Its body was too intact, its skin eerily smooth for something supposedly millions of years dead. Its tail curved behind it like a whip, and its clawed feet dug into the dirt as though it had been alive recently. Harper blinked, telling herself it had to be a trick of the light or an elaborate prop. But the more she stared, the more unsettled she became. This wasn't a staged museum exhibit. It looked real. Naturally, Harper's first call was to her colleague and close friend, Dr. Brody Webb. Brody was the kind of guy who approached life and science with a raised eyebrow and a sarcastic remark. When he saw the photo, he let out a laugh. "Oh, come on, Harper. That's clearly staged. Probably a carnival attraction or some early Hollywood publicity stunt. People loved faking dinosaur stuff back then." Using face recognition, Harper identified the men: a biologist, a big game hunter, and, most disturbingly, a military general overseeing the United States Army's Experimental Weapons Division. This wasn't a discovery. It was a classified operation. "It's General Helmer Ashworth," Harper confirmed, her voice trembling slightly. Ashworth wasn't just a random soldier from history. He was a documented World War I figure, a man whose name appeared in official military archives. It was a wild theory, the kind Harper knew would get her laughed out of most academic conferences. But the evidence that this might be more than an elaborate hoax was starting to piece. Brody Webb studied the image. His eyes narrowed. "The clothing's period is accurate. But this makes no sense." Harper nodded. The species didn't match any known dinosaur. It looked new, or perhaps very, very old. As Harper turned the photo over, another thought crept into her mind, one darker than she wanted to admit. For a long moment, the two stood in silence, staring at the faded image as if it might blink back at them. For Harper, the photograph doesn't look like an oddity. She just needed to put the pieces of the puzzle together to unravel the secrets buried deep in both a photo that's not in any history book. With Ashworth's involvement, the photo, once just a relic from the past, had become a dangerous key. And now Harper and Brody had to decide whether they were brave enough to seek the answers needed to unravel this mystery. A creature beyond explanation. Harper couldn't shake the photograph from her mind. She'd spent the entire night staring at it under the soft glow of her desk lamp, going back and forth between excitement and unease. It wasn't just a relic anymore. It felt like a message, and a whisper from a past that refused to stay buried. But she needed answers, and there was only one person she trusted to dig out the truth. That's how she and Brody found themselves standing outside a sleek door that belonged to digital forensic expert Dr. Lisa Park the following morning. Behind the door is a modern lab, the kind of place that smelled faintly of coffee and expensive tech. Lisa Park wasn't just good at her job, she was legendary. If there was a photograph that could stump the world, she was the one to call. Known for debunking countless historical hoaxes, Lisa had a reputation for being blunt, brilliant, and just a little intimidating. Brody adjusted his glasses, his eyes darting toward Harper with a mixture of apprehension and amusement. They were about to show their discovery to someone who might not take it seriously. A turn-of-the-century photograph that looked uncannily like a dinosaur selfie. Harper, however, seemed undeterred. Perhaps their audience would laugh, but Harper's gaze suggested she was convinced otherwise, that the image would speak for itself. Inside the lab, Lisa didn't waste time with small talk. She studied the faded photograph through her rectangular glasses, her face unreadable. After a long pause, she finally reacted, clearly intrigued. Lisa had seen countless oddities over the years, pictures of Bigfoot, UFOs, even ghostly brides, but nothing like this. She carefully placed the photo under a high-resolution scanner. The machine came to life with a soft blue glow, humming steadily as it began its work. Lisa's tone was all business as she explained the process, describing how she would enhance the image and break it down pixel by pixel. If there was even the slightest hint of forgery, she would find it. Brody leaned against the wall, whispering to Harper that it had to be a hoax. Harper didn't respond. Her focus was locked on the screen as the image slowly sharpened, revealing details even her magnifying glass had missed. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, until Lisa suddenly froze. Her detached professionalism vanished, replaced by shock. The photo was genuine. The paper, the ink, the chemical composition, everything checked out. It had been taken in 1914. Brody's jaw dropped, unable to hide his disbelief, but Lisa wasn't finished. She zoomed in on the creature in the photograph, pointing out faint, almost invisible lines crisscrossing its skin. At first, they appeared to be natural scars, but as she enhanced the image further, the horrifying truth became clear. These were surgical marks. Near the creature's joints, a small metallic glint came into focus. They were clamps, crude yet deliberate. Someone hadn't just captured this creature, they had modified it. Harper's stomach twisted as she processed what Lisa was saying. Someone had been experimenting on the creature, perhaps even attempting to control its behavior or weaponize it. At the base of its neck, there was an unnatural structure, an implant. Brody stepped closer to have a look. The implication was staggering. Someone had operated on a dinosaur. Lisa explained that this wasn't just evidence of a surviving species, it was proof of an active project. A living creature had been turned into a tool. The room fell into a heavy silence as the weight of the revelation settled over them. Brody backed away, his voice shaking as he tried to make sense of it. Early 20th century scientists conducting Frankenstein-like experiments? Harper's mind raced, piecing together fragments of information. General Ashworth's presence in the photograph, and the timing just before World War I. It all pointed to a chilling possibility. The military might have believed these creatures could change the course of battle, silent, unstoppable, nightmare weapons brought to life. Lisa shut off the scanner and crossed her arms, her usual confidence replaced by visible unease. She warned them to be careful. If the wrong people discovered this information, it wouldn't just be about history anymore, it would be about power. And somewhere, someone would see that creature not as a miracle, but as a weapon. Harper stared at the grainy photograph one last time. Moments ago, it had been a thrilling discovery, proof that the past wasn't as far away as they thought. Now, it felt like a curse, because they weren't just uncovering a lost chapter of natural history. They were unearthing a dark legacy of human greed, a reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones holding the scalpel. But there's more to this than Harper and Brody had expected. The Javernick legacy. Digging deeper, they found the name Theodore Javernick, a wealthy industrialist who had funded an expedition into the Amazon in 1912. Officially, they were looking for birds, but letters suggested otherwise. Finding Theodore Javernick's only living descendant was no small task. Harper and Webb spent weeks chasing down dusty genealogy records, dead-end phone calls, and a few grumpy librarians who definitely didn't get paid enough to deal with obsessive paleontologists. Finally, a lead surfaced. Perry Javernick, a 58-year-old living alone in a small countryside house miles from the nearest town. The address they were given led them down a winding dirt road lined with gnarled trees, the kind that seemed to lean in as if they were eavesdropping. The house itself looked like it belonged in another century. Chipped paint, overgrown garden, and a porch that creaked ominously with every step. Brody gave Harper a wary glance as they approached. "Remind me again why creepy old houses always mean bad news." "Because you've watched too many horror movies," Harper replied, though she didn't exactly disagree. Perry answered the door after several hesitant knocks. He was a tall, thin man with sunken eyes and a guarded expression. The kind of look worn by someone who had spent years keeping secrets and had no interest in letting strangers pry them open. He greeted them with a flat, rough voice, clearly not used to having a conversation with strangers. Harper introduced herself and her colleague, explaining that they were researchers studying the Amazon expeditions of the early 1900s, specifically the one led by Perry's great-grandfather, Theodore Javernick. At the mention of his ancestor's name, Perry's lips tightened. He told them their trip had been wasted, insisting he knew nothing beyond what was already public knowledge, and that whatever answers they sought had died with Theodore. Harper, unwilling to give up, carefully pulled a folder from her bag and slid the mysterious photograph across the threshold. Perry's eyes flickered as he stared down at it, though his expression remained carefully neutral. With sharp dismissal, he claimed that old photos didn't interest him and made it clear he wanted them to leave. Before he could close the door, Harper's voice softened. She pleaded with him, explaining that they weren't there to cause trouble. All they wanted was to understand what had really happened, because they believed his great-grandfather's expedition had discovered something extraordinary. For a long moment, Perry stood frozen. Then, without a word, he stepped aside and motioned for them to enter. The inside of the house was cluttered, but strangely cozy. Books stacked high on every surface, faded maps on the walls, and the faint smell of tea and old paper hanging in the air. Perry led them to a small sitting room and gestured for them to sit. He let out a sigh before disappearing into another room. When he returned, he was holding a worn leather-bound album, its cover cracked and faded from decades of handling. He set it on the table between them before explaining that what he held was all that remained of his great-grandfather's expedition records. Most of the documents had been destroyed in a fire in 2002, but a few had managed to survive. He opened the album to a page near the middle. Harper and Brody leaned forward and froze. It was another photograph. The same group of men from the 1914 picture, only this time they weren't standing beside a single creature. This time, there were two. One was the massive beast they'd seen before. The other is smaller. Brody's voice was barely a whisper as he observed that there had been two creatures, a parent and its offspring. Perry nodded gravely, confirming that this was what the old stories claimed. According to his grandfather, Theodore's team had stumbled upon a secluded Amazon tribe deep within uncharted territory. The tribe spoke of thunder lizards, ancient beings said to live in a hidden valley untouched by the outside world. He turned another page in the album, revealing a hand-drawn map covered in strange markings. The expedition, guided by members of the tribe, had followed the path into the valley and found the creatures. They weren't dinosaurs exactly, but something eerily close, smaller, bulkier, and terrifyingly intelligent. Harper's pulse quickened as Perry went on. Theodore had believed they were living relics of prehistory, species that had remained isolated for millions of years. He had wanted to study them. General Ashworth, however, had seen them differently, as potential weapons. Perry's tone darkened as he described what came next. Once Ashworth realized the creatures could be controlled, or at least restrained, he had ordered brutal containment measures. Chains, cages, even heavy metal clamps had been used to immobilize them. But it hadn't stopped there. Flipping to another page, Perry revealed unsettling journal entries written in Theodore's own handwriting. The notes described experiments, chemical injections designed to alter behavior, surgeries meant to enhance obedience, and even attempts to breed more of the creatures. Brody flinched, horrified by what he read. Perry's voice grew grim as he explained that most of the creatures hadn't survived these procedures. The juvenile had died within weeks, but one adult, a female, had endured. She hadn't just survived, she had changed. She became stronger, more cunning, almost as if she understood what was being done to her. He turned another page. The next entry described emotional responses, grief, anger, even what Theodore called strategic patience. Perry's voice dropped lower, as though speaking the next part aloud might summon the horrors described in the pages before him. Theodore and his team had believed they were in control, unaware of the true danger they faced. According to the journals, for weeks the surviving adult creature had appeared docile, even submissive. But this behavior had not been surrendered, it had been a strategy. The creature had been waiting. Then, one night, the creature struck. The attack was not a chaotic rampage. It was precise, almost military in its execution. Theodore had written of guttural calls echoing through the trees just moments before the cages were broken open. The night had filled with screams as the creatures descended on the outpost. They didn't attack at random. Their first targets were Ashworth's men. The command tent was ripped apart before the barracks fell. Every soldier who had harmed them slaughtered without hesitation, while others were spared entirely. They had been targeting specific people. That was planning. By dawn, the outpost was gone. 17 men lay dead, including General Ashworth himself. The camp had been reduced to ashes, and the surrounding jungle was left in an eerie silence, as though the creatures had simply vanished back into the earth. Only a handful of survivors had escaped, including his great-grandfather. But the true figure at the center of the escape, perhaps a hero, or perhaps the most cursed of them all, had been Dr. Elias Alaband, the expedition's biologist. According to Theodore's writings, Alaband had been the only member of the team to treat the creatures with anything resembling compassion. The female had shown a clear attachment to him, which might have been the sole reason she hadn't killed him immediately during the assault. As chaos consumed the camp, Theodore had described seeing Alaband shouting for the others to flee. Clutching his notes and photographs, the biologist had pushed Theodore toward the riverbank. Alaband and 4 others had escaped into the jungle, carrying the last surviving records of the expedition, the very photographs and journals now resting on Perry's table. Whatever had happened in that jungle over a century ago, it hadn't been a simple expedition gone wrong. It had been the beginning of something much darker, and possibly something still very much alive. The weight of the truth. Harper and Webb returned to the museum, surrounded by towering shelves of dusty relics and brittle documents. The only sound was the faint hum of the overhead lights and the soft rustle of the old journal pages Perry had entrusted to them. On the table lay everything they had uncovered: the haunting 1914 photograph, the second image of the juvenile creature, Theodore Javernick's tattered journal, and scattered field notes that smelled faintly of smoke and damp earth. Together, they painted a story too unbelievable for anyone outside that room to comprehend. Yet, it was all real. Brody Webb ran both hands through his hair, staring at the photograph as though it might suddenly leap to life. This discovery was history-shattering, something that could change everything humanity knew about evolution, extinction, and the natural world itself. Harper's gaze was locked on the creature's grainy eyes, frozen in the photo. Even in black and white, they seemed disturbingly alive, filled with something far beyond animal instinct. Frustration surged through Webb. He slammed his fist lightly against the table, his face etched with desperation. Was the answer really to do nothing? This discovery could revolutionize science, museums, and their own careers. They could be the ones to rewrite the textbooks and reshape history itself. Harper lifted her head. Her words were soft, but laced with unshakable resolve. If they announced this to the world, the creatures would not be seen as marvels of nature. They would be targets. Poachers would hunt them. Corporations would seek profit. Militaries would see weapons, just as General Ashworth had done a century earlier. Webb hesitated, caught between his soaring excitement and a growing dread. Keeping such a discovery secret felt wrong. They had proof: photographs, journals, eyewitness accounts. Hiding it seemed like erasing history itself. Harper drew in a deep breath and leaned forward, locking her eyes with his. History, she told him, wasn't what mattered. Life was. If these creatures had survived, even just one, they deserved freedom, far away from the cruelty that had nearly destroyed them. The world wasn't ready for this truth, not yet. The weight of that vow settled over the room like a heavy fog. The truth was too dangerous for the world. For now, it would remain buried, just like the creatures themselves. Echoes in the jungle. Some secrets refuse to stay buried. Harper Bog tried to convince herself that walking away from the discovery was the right thing to do. After all, she and Webb had agreed to keep the truth hidden, to protect the creatures from the same greed and cruelty that had nearly destroyed them a century ago. But no matter how many times she told herself that, her mind wouldn't let it rest. The photo, the journal, the way Perry's voice had trembled when he spoke of the creature's intelligence. It all gnawed at her like an itch she couldn't scratch. Webb wasn't much better. They'd both returned to their normal lives at the museum, filing fossils and giving lectures on extinct species. But beneath that facade, a fire still burned. There was unfinished business, and neither of them could ignore it. Late nights found Harper hunched over dusty expedition logs in the museum archives, tracing Theodore Javernick's exact route through the Amazon. She marked old, forgotten paths on a sprawling map pinned to her office wall. The red strings connecting places where sightings had been reported over the decades. Webb was just as restless. He spent hours combing through obscure explorer journals, government archives, and even cryptozoology forums, the kind of places serious scientists usually laughed at. But they weren't laughing anymore. And slowly, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Scattered reports trickled in, spanning decades and scattered across remote regions of the Amazon. Unexplained tracks, far too large and oddly shaped to belong to any known animal. Strange, guttural calls echoing through the jungle at night, described by locals as something between a crocodile's growl and a human scream. Blurry photographs and grainy videos showing glimpses of massive reptilian figures, always deep in the shadows of uncharted valleys. Most people dismissed these accounts as legends or hallucinations brought on by jungle fever. Tourists with overactive imaginations, native myths passed down through generations, nothing more. But Harper saw the connections others didn't. Every detail lined up eerily with Theodore Javernick's journal. The shapes of the tracks matched his drawings. The calls matched the phonetic spellings he'd scrawled in the margins. Even the locations seemed to fit perfectly with the routes his team had mapped. Then, one ordinary morning, everything changed. Harper arrived at her office to find a single envelope on her desk. There was no return address, no postage stamp, just her name, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Her stomach twisted with unease as she slid a letter opener beneath the flap. Inside was a faded, decades-old photograph. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than an overexposed image of dense jungle foliage. But when Harper tilted it toward the light, her breath caught. There, just behind a curtain of leaves, was a blurred, shadowy figure. It wasn't quite like the creature from the 1914 photo. Smaller, leaner, and harder to make out, but the shape was unmistakable. Reptilian, powerful, and disturbingly out of place in the modern world. Her hands trembled as she passed the photo to Webb. He stared at it for a long moment, his face pale. Then he muttered, almost to himself, "They're still watching." "Either it's a warning," he said slowly, "or it's an invitation." That night, Harper couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the events in her head, the original 1914 photographs, the horrific journal entries about the rebellion, the modern sightings, and now this mysterious new image. If one of those creatures had survived, it would have been out there for over a century, hidden deep within the Amazon, watching, learning, perhaps even evolving. The world thought dinosaurs were long gone, a story confined to fossils and museum displays. But Harper knew better. The jungle had never truly given up its secrets. It had only loaned them out, waiting for the right moment to remind humanity of what lurked beneath its green, tangled heart. And now that moment might be coming. A legacy preserved. That irony weighed heavily on Harper's mind. In museum halls around the world, people admired the remains of creatures thought to be extinct, never realizing that somewhere, deep in the uncharted corners of the Amazon, descendants of those very beings might still be alive, breathing, watching, waiting. Their bones are preserved with the utmost care, polishing them, displaying them like precious relics of a bygone age. Yet, if we knew the truth, would we treat the living descendants with the same reverence? Or would history repeat itself, just as it had with General Ashworth and his doomed experiment? Dinosaurs have been immortalized through fossils and stories, their legacy carefully curated by scientists and storytellers alike. The once mighty creature. In this world, dinosaurs were kings and queens. Colossal Brachiosaurus grazed from treetops as tall as skyscrapers, their long necks swaying like living cranes. Packs of razor-toothed velociraptors hunted with deadly precision, darting through the underbrush like shadows. The mighty Tyrannosaurus rex, apex predator of its time, thundered across the plains, its roar sending entire herds scattering in terror. For over 150 million years, dinosaurs didn't just survive, they thrived. Compared to their reign, humanity's time on Earth is barely a blink. They ruled every continent, adapted to countless environments, and shaped ecosystems in ways we are still trying to understand today. It was their planet, their era, their story. And then, in an instant, it was over. Scientists believe that about 66 million years ago, Earth was struck by one of the most catastrophic events in its history. A giant asteroid, hurtling through space at unimaginable speed, and it slammed into what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, releasing an explosion more powerful than every nuclear weapon on Earth combined. The aftermath was apocalyptic. Tidal waves ripped across oceans. Forests were incinerated in global wildfires. Ash and dust filled the atmosphere, blotting out the sun and plunging the world into darkness. But the asteroid wasn't the only villain in this extinction saga. Around the same time, massive volcanic eruptions, like those that formed the Deccan Traps in India, spewed toxic gases into the atmosphere. Temperatures swung wildly, ecosystems collapsed, and food chains disintegrated. Within a geological heartbeat, the age of dinosaurs ended. More than 3/4 of all species on Earth vanished, including the iconic giants that had once ruled the land. At least, that's the story we've always been told. The dinosaurs' reign had ended in fire and darkness. But perhaps, just perhaps, a piece of that ancient empire still clung to life. With tools like CRISPR, scientists are now capable of editing DNA with a precision once thought impossible. Around the world, researchers are experimenting with de-extinction projects, efforts to revive creatures long erased from the Earth. The woolly mammoth, for example, has been at the top of several labs' to-do lists. By inserting preserved mammoth DNA into the cells of modern elephants, teams hope to create a hybrid species and, eventually, repopulate the Arctic tundra with herds of these shaggy behemoths. It sounds like something out of science fiction, yet it's happening right now in carefully guarded laboratories. If we can attempt to revive a mammoth, people argue, why not dinosaurs? Movies like Jurassic Park may have made the idea thrilling or horrifying, but the truth is, we actually have fragments of dinosaur DNA preserved inside fossils and even in modern birds, their evolutionary descendants. The science isn't perfect, but the groundwork is being laid. One day soon, humanity might be standing at the edge of an astonishing and dangerous reality. But just because we can, doesn't mean we should. Harper thought about this often as she and Webb continued piecing together the puzzle of the 1914 photographs. The military men in Theodore Javernick's expedition had also seen dinosaurs not as living, breathing creatures, but as weapons. They chained them, experimented on them, tried to twist them into tools of war. And look how that ended, in blood and ruin. If modern scientists succeeded in reviving dinosaurs, what then? Would they be placed in sanctuaries, studied carefully and protected? Or would history repeat itself, with greed and ambition driving us to exploit them once more? Outside the museum, the world carried on as if nothing had changed. Children still pressed their noses to glass cases, marveling at fossils of creatures they believed were gone forever. Tourists still bought plastic dinosaur toys, blissfully unaware of what Harper and Webb now knew. Well, even though Dr. Harper Bog and Dr. Brody Webb adventure is all fantasy, a vivid dream that's been living in our minds, it's still not a far reach from what could have happened. If you have seen Jurassic Park and its sequels, it all makes this seem so real, so close to our reality, especially seeing how scientists have clung to the idea of bringing these apex predators back. The idea of someone succeeding in the past doesn't seem far-fetched. But what if dinosaurs are really out there somewhere, right, with a fraction that survived the disaster we all thought wiped them out, waiting for the world to find them again? Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out other videos on our channel. See you in our next video.